Hey there, and welcome into another episode of the Route 1 Rundown. I'm your host, Steve Gorgie, and I'm excited to be back for another episode to talk some Terps. But before I dive into everything going on in College Park, a reminder that this show is on YouTube and part of the Department of Hoops, a DMV media network, so make sure you check it out there. It's youtube.com/@Department of Hoops. You can also follow me all across the internet at the same handle. It's @GorgOnSports. So whether you're on TikTok, Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram, whatever it is, you can follow me there @GorgOnSports. All right, let's get right into it because the Terps are coming off an extraordinarily disappointing Thanksgiving week. There's not a whole lot to be thankful for right now if you're a fan of Maryland basketball. They go out to the Players Era Championship in Vegas, which is really the new crown jewel of Feast Week in college basketball. It's the tournament of all tournaments, if you can call it a tournament, considering it doesn't have a bracket, and it's almost impossible to figure out who you play after your first two guaranteed games, but that's neither here nor there. The fact of the matter is Maryland goes out there, they play late at night, 3 nights in a row, 2 nights at midnight Eastern time. They win the first game against UNLV 74-67, and then they give up a combined 205 points over the next 2 nights as they get shellacked by Gonzaga 100-61 and Alabama 105-72 as they fall to 5-3 on the season. So want to use this episode to go a little bit more forward-looking rather than drill into each of those games because I know a little bit of time has passed already since they played those games. We'll kind of want to use this to look forward. But let's start by doing a little good, bad, and ugly from this Players Era Championship. So let's start with the good, and there wasn't a whole lot of it. The one good thing that I really want to call out here is the play of Darius Adams over the course of this tournament and the course of this season so far. The most encouraging thing that I can possibly take out of these 3 games is that Darius Adams seemed to find his three-point shooting stroke a little bit in those blowout losses to Gonzaga and Alabama, going combined over the course of those 2 games, 7 for 11 from beyond the arc. Now, this is a guy who had been ice cold from 3 heading into this tournament. Shot looked a little bit better. Not sure if they made some sort of tweak there or what, but his shot, I never thought the shot looked terrible, but it did look a lot better in those 2 games. Certainly gave it a chance of going in. I got to watch it a little bit more closely over the next couple of weeks here and try to figure out if they made some sort of change or what changed there. But the bottom line is it's encouraging that Darius Adams, who he came in as a guy incredibly highly touted, incredibly highly ranked, McDonald's All-American, was a UConn commit, a really big coup for Buzz Williams to get him so late in the cycle. And he's a guy who has shown a lot of flashes early this season. He's shown the ability to attack the rim, shown the ability to get to the basket, but what he hadn't shown was the ability to knock down the outside shot, which is something this team sorely, sorely needs, given right now they rank 299th nationally in three-point shooting percentage. So if Darius Adams can find that shot, can find some consistency with that outside shot over the course of the rest of the season, that's something to at least watch for. That's something to be hopeful about. And really, Darius Adams' play as a whole is something to be hopeful about when you think about this team, this program, what you can build on if this does end up becoming an absolutely lost season. Darius Adams is a guy who you certainly want around next season with Baba Olodotun coming in, and we haven't even had a chance to talk about that since the last episode, but Baba Olodotun does commit to Maryland on the same night as the game over against Mount St. Mary's. Maryland ends up winning in overtime, but more exciting and more importantly in that game, Baba Olodotun, formerly the number 1 prospect in the class of 2027, now the number 10 prospect in the class of 2026 after reclassifying, is going to be a Terp. He has signed his letter of intent, and that is a good thing. That's something that Maryland can be thankful for, can provide some excitement over what could be a very dark next couple of months. But you're looking for guys now who can play alongside of him, who can be contributors with him. I think Darius Adams very clearly is one of those guys, and if there's one good thing I can take from this trip out to Vegas, which didn't leave a whole lot of positives, it was Darius Adams finding his outside shot a little bit, and something to certainly continue to watch over the next couple of weeks. The bad. the bad. There is so much to pick from in the bad. But for me, it's always giving up 100 plus points in back-to-back game. I've heard it time and time again. Every coach, every level, no matter who you talk to, they are always going to say, control the things you can control, and your defensive effort is something that you can control. Now, I don't want to necessarily call out the defensive effort because I don't know that it's that. I don't know that it's an effort thing. But look, it's just not good enough on defense. Sometimes you are going to run into a hot team, and to some extent, maybe that's what happened against Gonzaga. Gonzaga absolutely torrid from beyond the arc. They go 14 for 33 in that game. But a little bit of that, I think, was Maryland trying to take away a guy inside like Graham Ike, make Gonzaga beat you in other ways. With Alabama, 14 of 31 from beyond the arc. And Maryland, I mean, how many games have we seen now against Nate Oates' Alabama teams where they just drop a ton of threes on Maryland? It's happened twice in NCAA tournaments against two different coaches, Mark Turgeon and then Kevin Willard. Now the Terps play the Tide again in this tournament. Not quite as high stakes as the last two meetings, but the result very much the same. Alabama drops a ton of threes. That's their style of play. That's what Nate Oates does. That's what his teams do. And they crushed Maryland on the offensive side of the ball. Just ugly to give up 100 points in back-to-back games. And I can live with, sometimes your shot doesn't fall. Sometimes it's just not there offensively. But again, maybe I have listened to too many coaches. Maybe I am brainwashed by what they preach. But it's a lot harder for me to live with giving up 100 points on back-to-back nights than, for instance, the opposite side of the coin, if you couldn't hit 60 points on back-to-back nights. That's a lot harder for me to live with. This Maryland team, it's hard to figure out right now what's worse, the offense or the defense. I think it's probably the offense, but man, against good teams, against good opponents, they've really struggled defensively as well. So that's the bad right there for me. And then the ugly is Maryland's season and how it seems to be slipping away. Because one thing, playing good opponents doesn't really hurt you when it comes to the NCAA tournament, when it comes to perception, even if you lose. The one way it can is if you get absolutely blown out, and that's what Maryland did on 2 nights in a row. Maryland now in the predictive metrics that matter, that people look at, number 97 in Torvik, number 94 in KenPom. And Maryland is in a hole. Maryland is in a deep hole. Even going to overtime and winning a game in overtime at home against Mount St. Mary's was not a good indication of where things were going. But through the first 8 games of this season here, Maryland has not really shown any indication of being able to be an NCAA tournament team right now. So I want to get back to that in just a second. I want to get back on how we need to maybe change expectations for the rest of the season, what we should be looking at, and so on and so forth. But I want to mention one more good thing because we haven't had an episode since then. Pharrell Payne and the fact that he is playing and he is playing effectively after the injury that we saw at Marquette, after he went down in what looked like just a horrendous injury. You could hear the screams through the TV. He was stretched off the court. He went to the hospital. I did an episode right after that. I said, let's work under the assumption that he's not going to play the rest of the year. He misses 1 game against Mount St. Mary's. He comes back. He plays the last 3 out there in Vegas. And Pharrell Payne looks like the player he was before he got injured. It's wonderful to see, and it's a saving grace for this season. I'm really happy for him, and I'm hopeful that at least him being on the court will save this season from slipping into some sort of North Carolina, Matt Doherty, 8-20 kind of nightmare. That is my hope, is that at least with Pharrell Payne on the court, you have a guy who is borderline all Big Ten caliber, or I'll just say all Big Ten caliber, who can keep you in some games on a night in and night out basis. Because without him, and you saw it against Mount St. Mary's, they are scarily thin in the front court. So that is another good thing. Just the fact that Pharrell Payne is back healthy, is playing, is in this lineup, that gives me at least a little bit of hope for the rest of the season. So let's talk about the rest of the season. And let's talk about what the expectations should be going forward for this team for the rest of the year. I came into this season incredibly unsure of what to expect with this team. I don't think anybody could reasonably tell you, I know what to expect. I always thought the range of outcomes was incredibly high, from absolute disaster to probably make the tournament, win a game. I thought a Sweet 16 would have been a pretty tough putt for this team, just given the way the roster was put together and how late in the cycle it was put together. That seemed like, to ask this team to go to the second weekend seemed incredibly unrealistic. But I did think there was the possibility that this team could be a tournament team, given the upper ceiling from guys like Pharrell Payne, like Miles Rice, that Elijah Saunders has contributed in the past on a good San Diego State team, that Isaiah Watts seemed like he had taken a step forward in year 2 at Washington State, that Darius Adams was a guy who had some talent. Obviously, McDonald's All-American. We didn't 100% know what to expect, but we knew he had some talent. And then the fact that Buzz Williams does have the reputation as a good coach, as a guy who can get his team to improve over the course of the season. I thought that this team had the potential at the upper level to be a tournament team and maybe win a game. I think at this point, that would be very unrealistic to ask of this team, given what we have seen through 8 games so far. They have shown no ability to compete with the teams that they would see in an NCAA tournament, like a Gonzaga, like an Alabama. And I get it, those teams would be protected seeds. They'd be 3 seeds, 2 seeds, 1 through 4 seeds, protected seeds. Those are very, very good basketball teams. But they struggled a lot with Georgetown, which Georgetown, I think, is probably a bubble team. They went out last week. They lost to Dayton and Miami, teams that you want to beat if you're going to make the NCAA tournament. I think Georgetown is probably a bubble team, and that's what they'll be on one side or the other when the year comes to an end. But they are certainly no sure thing, and Maryland struggled at home against that team. Obviously, Maryland has not been healthy at all this season. Miles Rice did not look like the player that he was, even in that Georgetown game. He plays against Georgetown. He does have a very nice game, but he then misses a couple more games, including the Marquette one, comes back for the Players era. He plays in all 3 games, 23 minutes against UNLV, 10 minutes against Gonzaga, 12 minutes against Alabama, but he was pretty non-existent in those last 2 games. He doesn't look like the player that he was against Georgetown. He doesn't really look like the player that he was in the past at Indiana or Washington State either. I don't know what his health level is. It doesn't seem like he's quite at full strength yet, or I don't know if there's a rust factor there, but Miles Rice does not look like the player that Maryland needs him to be if they're going to make an NCAA tournament, or even get close to an NCAA tournament, or finish or go to an NIT even. So I think at this point, and then Solo Washington, he's a guy who warmed up, was dressed in all 3 games out of the Players era, but didn't play a minute. We still have yet to see him this year. And I think Solo Washington helps this team a ton, just become more athletic, look better defensively. I say it almost every episode, but Isaac Trotter, 24/7 Sports, one of the best national college basketball guys in the business, came on this very show and raved about Solo Washington and what he could do on the defensive end, how he could be one of the best wing defenders in the country in the offseason. We haven't seen that yet. And even last season, you listen to Buzz Williams after any game, you read what was written after A&M games. Solo Washington's name continually came up as a guy who was a difference maker on the defensive end and just doing those little things. So I think even maybe from a leadership perspective, perspective, they could be missing him as well. Maryland has not been healthy at all yet. I really want to see this team healthy, at least for a small stretch, but at this point, through 8 games, and college basketball is a relatively small sample size sport. It's not college football where you play 12 games, but it's not the NBA where you play 82 games either. We're almost a third of the way through the season right now, 25% of the way through the season right now. So things have got to get better and got to get better quickly if Maryland has any hope of competing for an NCAA tournament bid. But I think the expectation at this point can't be to make the NCAA tournament. I really don't. I think it's wishful thinking to look at this team and say, I expect them to figure out a way to get in the NCAA tournament. For me, I want to see this team get better over the course of the season. I want to use this year to evaluate who can be a contributor next year and really figure out for this coaching staff to figure out what can they do next year with Baba Olodotun coming in, with some other talented guys in that recruiting class coming in. Caden House, the combo guard, a top 50 player in the country. Among them, what can they do? Who can they pair these talented freshmen with to create a roster, to build a team that is capable of doing all the things that we expect here at Maryland? The expectations for me always at Maryland are to make the NCAA tournament. That is a non-negotiable for me. You should make the tournament at Maryland 9 out of 10 years. That's number 1. 2 is advance in the tournament. Get to the second weekend, compete for Final Fours, compete for conference championships. That's the level that everybody should be aspiring to at Maryland. So to me, that's the goal the rest of this year is don't let the season completely slip away. See if you can find a way to keep yourself on the bubble. See if you can make a postseason tournament, make the NIT. But I don't know how you can sit here, look at this roster, look at this team through 8 games, and realistically say, I expect to make the NCAA tournament, because this team does not look NCAA tournament caliber. It does not look like it has the ability to compete with the top of the sport right now. And you look at the metrics, you look at the predictives. Maryland right now predicted to go 13-18, 6-14 by the KenPom algorithm. It has the potential to get ugly and get ugly fast in Maryland and College Park, and I don't want to see this team quit. That's my expectation. I don't want to see this team quit. I want to see them continue to fight. I want to see them win Big Ten games. I want to see them pull an upset. I want to see them not go completely in the tank, and in the process of doing that, I want this coaching staff to figure out who are the guys that can be around next year, that can contribute to this team, and how do we position Maryland to get back to the spot where it needs to be every year? Because I will tell you one thing, and I will tell you one thing right now. There has the potential for things to get really, really, really ugly with this fan base. Let me give you one more really there. Because I was at that game against Mount St. Mary's, and the attendance was listed at 10,318. There were not 10,318 people in that stadium. I'm not sure if there were 2,000 people in the student section, and that is being generous. We have here right now at Maryland the potential for a Brian Kelly and LSU situation. Look, I wouldn't say that when Buzz Williams was hired, he was necessarily the Maryland fan base's first choice, second choice, even third choice. I wouldn't say that Buzz Williams was a guy who was really on the radar for the Maryland fan base. Or let's put it this way, the type of high ceiling hire that I think a lot of fans were looking for. I think Maryland fans were looking for a guy who could give them hope and say, hey, he could be the guy that gets us where we want to go. Because the number one complaint with Maryland fans for a long time, through the Mark Turgeon era, through the Kevin Willard era, really in the post-Gary Williams national championship era, has been we're not making deep runs in the tournament. were not winning games at the highest level. And there's so much that goes into it from an infrastructure perspective, from a coaching perspective, from a player acquisition perspective. There's so much that goes into it. But that has been the number one complaint. Mark Turgeon, very consistent over his time at Maryland. Very high floor among his Maryland teams, but they were not reaching that upper echelon. They never felt like they were real threats to get to a Final Four, to win a national championship. We can talk till we're blue in the face about the 2020 team and what their potential was if that tournament wasn't canceled. But the fact of the matter was that was a very wide open year in college basketball, and Maryland still felt a notch below some of those top teams. So that's been the ultimate complaint among Maryland fans. And I think a lot of people were disappointed when they look at a guy like Buzz Williams and say, well, he's been all over the place. He's been good. He's never been great. Why is he going to be great at Maryland? Especially given that everybody is now telling us now as Kevin Willard exits that we don't have the resources, we don't have the infrastructure to compete at the very, very top of the sport. So what's going to be different for Buzz Williams coming into Maryland that's going to allow him to go to that extra level? That is the question a lot of Maryland fans were asking. So you start with that. You then add in the fact that Buzz Williams is a incredibly unique guy. Whether you like his eccentricities or you dislike his eccentricities, he is incredibly unique, and there's no denying that. And I think for a lot of people, they felt very disconnected from Maryland basketball since Buzz Williams has come in. There's no former players on the staff. There's no local guys on the staff. There's no local players on this team. There's nobody that was, except for one walk-on, that was on this roster last year. I think for a lot of Maryland fans who were kind of disgusted with the way last season ended with Kevin Willard's exit, it gave them an easy excuse to disengage with this team, because when Buzz Williams comes to your school, in many ways it feels like the University of Buzz Williams and no longer the University of Maryland. And that is all fine when you are winning. That is all fine when you are winning. But much like Brian Kelly and LSU, and if you don't get the reference, Brian Kelly was named the head football coach at LSU. He did a little thing at a basketball game where he was introduced, and he put on this fake Southern accent, and he said, "My family," and it's become a meme. It's become a joke. It's become a drop on any radio show that talks about college sports. Brian Kelly, from that moment on, never felt like a cultural fit at LSU. And when you win, that's absolutely fine. Nobody cares. Nobody cares at Alabama that Nick Saban was from West Virginia. It doesn't matter. But where that stuff starts to matter is when you talk about how much leash the fan base is willing to give you, how much goodwill the fan base is willing to give you. And right now, it feels like this fan base could disengage entirely based on the attendance that I saw against Mount St. Mary's, based on the results that I saw out in Vegas, and based on just what I've seen from this fan base over the past now, nearly 25 years since winning that national championship. Believe it or not, we are coming up, not this basketball season, but next basketball season will be the 25th anniversary of that national championship. So it's so early in Buzz Williams' tenure in College Park, but I just see these warning signs, and I keep thinking about Brian Kelly and how that lack of cultural fit allowed him so little leash and ultimately led to his demise. Because when you win, nobody cares. But when you lose, all of that stuff starts to matter. Now, of course, the saving grace for Buzz Williams is the signing of Baba Alodatoon. It's something that you can hang your hat on. It's something that you can look forward to. It's something that can give this fan base just a glimmer of hope. But this team can't go in the tank completely. This team has to fight through this tough stretch here. This team has to tread water, and I've said it in so many times, so many ways. I've said tread water with this team a million times. Well, now when I talk about treading water, it's not treading water to keep your tournament hopes alive. To me, it's treading water just so you can get healthy and show some semblance of a roster that can compete in the Big Ten, where you can actually upset a team, where you can win a game. You're going to have Michigan who looks unbelievable right now, that blew out that Gonzaga team by 40 points out in Vegas, that beat Auburn, that put up over 100 points on back-to-back nights against Auburn and Gonzaga. They put up 94 on San Diego State the night before that. This is a Gonzaga or a Michigan team rather that's number one in KenPom, that's coming in to Xfinity Center in 2 weeks. I don't have any reason to believe right now that this Maryland team can upset them, but that's what I want to see this team grow and keep fighting for the rest of this season is, can they find a way to stay in the fight here and maybe pull off one of those upsets and maybe give the fan base a moment so they don't completely disengage. Because the last thing you want at Maryland is a completely disengaged fan base. The last thing you want in college sports anywhere is a completely disengaged fan base. But this fan base can go to the highest of highs when things are rolling, when things are going well. There is no better big game venue than the Xfinity Center. But when things are not going well, when things are low, this is a fan base that will completely disengage. And you know what? I get it, and I don't blame anybody out there. If you stayed up till 2 a.m. to watch Maryland get absolutely waxed by Gonzaga the night before Thanksgiving, by Alabama the night before Thanksgiving, the night before that, you only had to stay up till about midnight. I have no qualms, no issues. I'm not going to scold you. I'm not going to call you a bad fan. I'm not going to call the fan police on you. If you say, you know what, I'll watch when I can. I don't need to watch other than that. I'm not going to spend my hard-earned money to go to a game to watch them get absolutely crushed. I get it. I completely get that. But I just want to see this team continue to fight, hopefully improve, so the fan base doesn't disengage. Because I certainly, for everything I just said about how I see these Brian Kelly things, it doesn't mean that I don't think Buzz Williams can still win, that he can still be successful, that he isn't a good basketball coach. I think he is a good basketball coach. I think he's proven that over his many stops. His approach, his philosophy, I might not totally see eye to eye on it. It might not be the way that I would necessarily go about it, or what I would like to see Maryland's coach do necessarily, but you can't argue with the guy who's able to come in here and completely able to turn around the recruitment of Baba Olodotun. By all accounts, that was Buzz Williams and some infrastructure at Maryland thing. A guy like Baba is not coming to Maryland without some sort of NIL package, so we need to give some credit there as well. But I think that's a very positive thing. I will continue to say, in an era where we see so little continuity from year to year, the fact that Buzz Williams was able to get two guys in Andre Mills and George Turkson to transfer with him from Texas A&M to College Park after they were redshirted at A&M is unreal. And I think that can actually be a real advantage in this era of college basketball if you can get a little bit more roster continuity from year to year. He's a guy who is into analytics, who sees the value in analytics. I think those are all good things. So I don't say any of what I said to say that 8 games in, this era is a failure. They should cut bait. That's not me. That's not what I do. I'm not going to call for anybody's head 8 games in. What I'm saying is this team right now does not look anywhere close to an NCAA tournament team. The expectation that Maryland should always be the NCAA tournament, and I want to see this team keep fighting and growing because there are some things with Buzz Williams where he's eccentric and not necessarily a cultural fit for this Maryland fan base, where I could see things going sour very quickly and this fan base completely disengaging. And that would be the worst thing for everybody. If you care about Maryland basketball, if you care about where this program goes, the worst thing for it would be for the fan base to disengage completely, because in college sports, that matters. In college sports, your infrastructure matters. So that's kind of the stakes as I view them for the rest of this Maryland basketball season. Can this team grow? Can they give fans something to latch on to while also holding on to that glimmer of hope that is Baba Olodotun, a big-time local prospect deciding to stay home and come to Maryland? That's part of the stakes. Part of the stakes are, can this coaching staff identify the talent that will surround Baba Olodotun next year? who on this roster right now can be part of a team that makes the NCAA tournament next year, that competes to go to a second weekend, that maybe can compete for a Big Ten title. And let me tell you, this Big Ten is really good. This is a good conference. You look at it right now. Michigan number 1 in KenPom, Purdue number 2, Michigan State 15. Then you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more teams in the top 30. This is a conference with some teams that are trying to win national championships. Michigan with Dusty May is a national championship caliber program. Purdue with Matt Painter, no question about it. Michigan State with Tom Izzo, enough said. Illinois with Brad Underwood, they're getting there. They're certainly trying. This is a conference where you have got to bring it every night, bring it in the offseason when it comes to player acquisition. So there's a lot to figure out the rest of this season for the Terps. So that's what I view as the stakes. I no longer view the stakes as trying to make the NCAA tournament. However, if they could find a way to get healthy, string together some good wins, it's not entirely out of the realm of possibility. Just nothing through this first 8 games has said to me this is an NCAA tournament team, but there are some bigger picture stakes to me that are still at play here. And it all starts with, can this team fight? Can this team grow? And can this coaching staff start to evaluate the players that can make an impact beyond this season? That's the show for today. I will be back with so much more. Terps play Wagner on Tuesday, and then they start Big Ten play with Iowa on Saturday. So I'll be back later this week with a reaction to that Wagner game and a preview of what the Terps can expect as they go out to Iowa City and face off against the Hawkeyes and new head coach Ben McCollum, the undefeated Iowa Hawkeyes, in their first Big Ten game. That's the show for today. Until next time, this has been the Route 1 Rundown.